Chapter 4. Elspeth unbuckled her armor and laid it on the floor. She wrapped her sword in rags and hid it under blankets on the cot in her rented room in the foreigners' quarter at the edge of Akros. There was an old mirror above the wash basin, and Elspeth caught a glimpse of her distorted reflection. With her hair gathered high on her head in the popular Akroan style and wearing a simple silk dress, she could have been mistaken for a carefree native of the city. She looked like a woman with no scars, no regrets. The reflection in the mirror didn't look like someone who lay awake at night counting the litany of mistakes she'd made. Aran and the Knights of Bant, they all thought she was honorable and pure, but she was riddled by doubt and far from blameless. She could put on the shining armor, but Elspeth knew what she was. She was like Akros, this city of gods and warriors. On the surface, Akros was glorious, all scrubbed stone and hot red banners, but every place had an underbelly of madness and violence, like what she'd just witnessed with the crazed satyrs. The people who inhabited the shadowy corridors and poorest hovels, untainted by lies of glory, might be thieves and liars, but in some ways they were more honest than all the kings on their thrones. And if she only visited the beautiful temples with their open doors and careful words of praise, she would never learn the truth. When her friend Ajani looked at her, he saw her for what she could be, not what she really was. Ajani was a fellow planeswalker and a Leonin from Alara, and it was his gift to look at someone and see past their failures, to the pinnacle of their potential. He'd seen her fighting like a disreputable thug in a gladiator's pit in Urborg, and still treated her as if she were a noble knight. She hadn't seen the Leonin since Dominaria, when he returned her sword to her. She wondered what Ajani would have to say about the gods of Theros. She knew he wouldn't have good things to say about where she was going and what she was about to do. Elspeth crossed the small room to the open window that overlooked a dingy alley. A warm breeze blew over the tops of the buildings, and the stone colossus, which towered over all the roofs of the city. The stone colossus faced the ring of red mountains on the horizon with his arms raised as if to taunt the world. This city has never been conquered by our enemies. But Elspeth had stood in the crowd on temple days as the bodies streamed past her on their way into Iroa's massive temple. She knew that in less time than it takes to blow out a candle, it could all come crashing down. How could they not comprehend the fragility of their lives? It was true that they had never witnessed the sickly ground of Grixis emerge into the placid fields of Bant. They had never seen Elesh Norn's minions up to their elbows in blood and flesh from the slaughter. They didn't know the horrors that could befall their world. Though the Akroan legions made her feel safe, she could also sense arrogance among the well-trained, well-fed natives of the city. They believed they were indestructible. And after what happened at the Takis estate, she wondered if their arrogance was blinding them to dangers already present in the world. Or maybe Theros was different. Maybe gods made it different. Perhaps they wouldn't permit their people to be taken to slicing rooms and be subjected to the butchery she'd witnessed on Mirrodin, the metal world now overrun by Phyrexia. No matter what plane she went to, she found savagery. But she'd never been to a place with gods. Maybe Theros was incorruptible, but Elspeth couldn't take it on faith. She had to find the underbelly herself. An elevated walkway known as Stone Pike ran along the perimeter of the foreigners' quarter, and it was the fastest way to get through the crowds and winding streets. Non-natives said the route had been built so the Akroans didn't have to mingle with the outsiders. It might be true. You had to pay a toll at the gates on either end, which was too pricey for most foreigners, who often didn't have access to Akroan currency. Elspeth paid with some of the coins she'd earned from the Taki's estate job, and climbed the steep marble steps up to the walkway. A crimson sun was setting behind the mountains, and the evening light stained the city with red light. To her left, she could see the uniformed soldiers training on one of the many public parade grounds. The men moved in perfect formations, stopping on precise commands and slicing their swords simultaneously through the air. Their stances and angles of their blades were slightly different, but the forms were very similar to those of Bant. Men seemed to reach the same conclusions when they set their minds to war. The soldiers trained near a public monument known as the Five Mountains, shallow rectangular pools with glistening water. A colorful mosaic dedicated to one of the major gods decorated the bottom of the pool. Elspeth stopped, as she often did, where she had a clear view of Heliod. His strong features and piercing eyes were as familiar as ever. Heliod was the one she'd seen years ago on the summit with the little boy with the amulet. Over the years, she'd often thought of him, and how, without him, she would have died alone in the forest. The other gods were just images under rippling water, but Heliod was something more. The memory of him always carried a tinge of childhood fear. The stone pike was crowded with soldiers heading home for the evening and young couples strolling together. She was blocking the flow of foot traffic, so Elspeth hurried on her way. Beyond the tall gate, at the other end of the stone pike, Elspeth crossed the crowded boulevard and stopped in front of a large public bathhouse. It was Jiro who begrudgingly gave her directions and warned her that young women must avoid the main baths. Instead, she entered the shared courtyard behind the building. When she saw the untended garden and pool with stagnant water, Elspeth knew she was headed in the right direction. She followed a deserted colonnade with cracked columns, and her footsteps echoed in the silence. Strange, windswept piles of black sand were heaped along the inner wall. Jiro told her to look for a defaced statue of a soldier with a broken javelin. There was a hidden door behind that statue that marked the entrance she was looking for. She found the crumbling statue easily. The door behind it was harder to find. It was getting dark, and she had to search the surface of the dirty wall for a certain stone, the one with a symbol of a knife carved into it. It took so long, she thought that her friend had sent her on a wild goose chase. By the time she found it low on the wall, she was angry, both with Jiro and with this task she'd set for herself. She pushed at the stone with the toe of her soft slipper, and a door opened. Beyond was a dim, foul-smelling corridor littered with crates and sacks, and lit only by strange orbs of light hovering near the ceiling. Her anger made her reckless. With her heart beating fast, she stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her, and as her eyes adjusted to the strange light, she recoiled in shock. What she had mistaken as sacks were actually inert bodies. Elspeth reached for her sword and remembered she left it back in her room. She peered more closely at the slumped figure just inside the doorway. He was a young man, sitting on a crate with his back against the dank wall. When she leaned closer, his eyes popped open, and she stumbled back in surprise. His eyes were glassy and unfocused, and he mumbled incoherently. Elspeth picked her way down the corridor, past other humans in a similar condition. It reminded her of the poppy dens she'd seen on Kelfir. Someone had scrawled lewd pictures in graphic detail on the walls. Violent and depraved images of humans and satyrs repulsed her, and she better understood Zero's reluctance to send her here. Among the graffiti, there was a single phrase scrawled over and over. King Stranger. It was the same phrase that the satyrs had been screaming before they burst into flames. Elspeth didn't have time to ponder it, because something moved behind her. She spun around and saw a man watching her from an open doorway. The edges of the doorframe were blackened and pockmarked from the heat of a past fire. The man, who was wearing a dark blue cloak with gold trim, stared at her intensely. He wore a leather knife belt diagonally across his chest, and there were braids in his long black beard. He looked young and powerful. When their eyes locked, he seemed to dissolve backward into the room. Elspeth followed. Inside, a lantern hung on the wall over a wooden table scarred with knife cuts. The stone wall had also been slashed by dozens of blades, though what blades could cut stone, Elspeth didn't know. On the floor below, knives had been stuck into the ground through small pieces of paper. Jiro had told her that visitors to the Temple of Deceit were usually looking to kill someone. Each page bore the name of someone who was hated. She'd found the altar of Phoenix, god of deception. The man had retreated across the room and stood near the table as if waiting for her offering. "Are you an oracle?" she asked. "Who do you want dead?" he asked. He had a low voice that rumbled in his chest. "I just want my answers," Elspeth said. "I want someone who will tell me the truth." "And why do you suppose Phoenix, the god of deception, would tell you the truth?" the man asked. There was no trace of mirth in his voice. "I've been to many temples in Akros," Elspeth said, "and the oracles all tell me the same thing. Pray to the gods, honor the gods, and they will make your life the way you want it. Is that true? I need an answer unclouded by those who seek glory." The man stared at her for a moment. He pushed back his hood so she could see his face more clearly despite the dim light. He was a handsome man with a clean-shaven head, dark eyes, and chiseled muscles in his arms and chest. "Who sent you to me?" he asked. "You knew the way. You must have had an insider's introduction." Jiro had obliged her request, but he didn't understand it. Nor did she understand Jiro, a mercenary in thrall to Iroas, a god who had cast him out. She didn't want to reveal him to this priest of Phoenix in case he had broken some rule by telling her where to find the altar. "I paid for the information. I will pay you as well," she said. She held out a handful of smooth gold coins that Jiro assured her would be accepted by anyone, anywhere. "You work for the Cutters of Iroas," he said. "Phoenix is aware of the strangers in this city." "Yes, I have done some work for them," she agreed. "I heard they were slaughtered by pug-faced satyrs," he said. He looked at the coins and back to her face. He made no move to take them. "Not all of them," she said. "You don't mourn for your friends." "They weren't my friends," she said. "But what will you do now?" "Maybe I'll be an assassin, like you," she said. "You seem too gentle to be an assassin." "So do you," she replied. "You seem unafraid, even if I were," he said with a vague smile. "Will you help me or not?" she asked. She rattled the coins in her hand. Jiro said that money was the only requirement for a priest of lies, but this man didn't seem tempted at all. "What is your name?" the man asked. Elspeth hesitated and decided it didn't matter. "I'm Elspeth." "My name is Sarpedon, and you are seeking something I'm not entitled to give you. You should leave the city. Anex's advisors are increasingly mistrustful of outsiders. You will be cast out soon enough. Better to leave of your own free will. I can tell you're a child lost in an unknown land." "Are you an oracle?" she asked, despite the fact that he hadn't accepted payment. There was a long silence, as if he were considering the merits of her question. "Yes, "What does that mean?" she asked. "Oracles can speak directly with the gods," he told her. "We are the gods' vessels. To all the world, we are considered the greatest and most honored. But if you are seeking the truth, I will tell you. Being an oracle means devastation. An oracle is consumed by the god who chose him." "What can an oracle do for gods that they can't do themselves?" Elspeth asked. "Gods see all things at once. They need the eyes of the mortals to multiply their domain. A mortal sees on a smaller scale than a god." "You see things that the gods don't?" Elspeth asked. "We see things that the gods dismiss as unimportant," Sarpedon corrected. "We are their hands and feet among the mortal realm. A god cannot harm another's oracle, but an oracle can kill whomever he pleases." There was no threat in his words. He said them in a detached way, as if he was repeating words he'd read on a page long ago. "Can the gods determine my fate? What is truly the intent of their power? Can they make what I want happen, if only I please them enough?" "If you want a god to determine your fate, you must ask him for an ordeal. A god will only grant it if they think you are worthy, whatever worthy means for them. If you accomplish it, you may request a hand in your own destiny." As he said those words, Sarpedon reached out and grasped Elspeth's hand. The coins were cupped between their palms. She started to yank her arm away, then stopped. This priest of lies was her best hope of understanding, and in that moment, she let go of logic. She didn't care what happened to her. That had happened to her before, and she should know better. Part of her mind was warning her to act, but the other part of her was intensely curious to see what would happen. In a few seconds, no matter what he did, she would know more than she did now. She let the priest pull her closer to him, until there was no space between them. He placed the other hand on the curve of her hip. He leaned forward so his lips were close to her ear. "Why do you speak the divine?" he whispered. Then Elspeth knew for certain Sarpedon was a mind mage, and he was casting his net into her memories. She knew she could still free herself from his spell and break his nose with the flat of her hand. Instead, she permitted his touch. For a fleeting instant, she wanted someone to know what had happened to her. She wanted someone to know what she had endured. "Go ahead and look." With her free hand, she slipped the dagger from the sheath under her arm. "I hope you drown." He became a light-footed spy traveling along the pathways of her brain, seeing much but not all. It was a strange and not unpleasant feeling to have him steal through her mind. With a shudder, the man dropped her hand, and the coins clattered to the floor. He slumped back against the wall, and then dropped to his knees in front of her. "You are greater than the gods," he said in awe. "You walk in worlds they can't see. You've faced evil they can't comprehend." "No, I'm not," Elspeth said. "I'm a conduit to Phoenix," Sarpedon said. There was a strange desperation in his voice. "Now he knows what you are. He knows what you carry." "Please," Elspeth reached down and tried to pull him to his feet. "Please stand up." But the man remained on his knees as if in worship before her. "Have you heard this god story, Elspeth? A woman wished to change her lot in life, so she prayed to Nylea to set her free. Nylea heard her prayers and transformed the woman into a butterfly. But now the world was so immense that the butterfly couldn't find her way. So she prayed to Heliod to send the south wind to guide her home. Heliod took pity on this speck of a life and sent the wind, but it battered her and tore her wings, carried on currents she couldn't control. She fluttered into the heart of a spider's web, which is what Phoenix had intended all along. They can't control the whole world, Elspeth said after a moment of reflection. She couldn't bear to stand above him, so she sank to her heels so their eyes were on the same level. They can only control their portions of it. Some gods' domains are greater than the others, but even the greatest of them all is going blind. What do you mean? Elspeth asked. The god of deception will punish me for saying this. So I say this as a man, and not his servant. Step below the sun and seek your god there. You mean Heliod? Elspeth said. There is a great silence on the horizon. Already, I can feel your secrets leaking to Phoenix. He will lock them in the chest of his mind until he knows how best to use them to his advantage. Sarpedon crawled to the altar and pressed his forehead against the handle of one of the knives. Elspeth didn't know what else to do. She dropped the coins on the floor and went in search of the one god she'd been avoiding. Even as the priest of lies bowed in front of Elspeth, Phoenix sought Thesa in the cold quiet of the sea. Thesa and Phoenix shared an arrangement from the old days when Archons tyrannized the land. But sharing secrets had taken a toll on her, and Thesa regretted ever casting in her lot with the god of cheats and liars. Even as Elspeth recoiled from Sarpedon, Thesa listened intently to Phoenix's whispers about the stranger in Akros. Even as Elspeth despised the priest of lies, Thesa despised Phoenix as he shared his secrets. Phoenix threatened to use the secrets to control her, planning for the day when she would serve him in exchange for his silence. Phoenix whispered, "This mortal wields the sword of a god. She possesses Perforos' sword that was claimed by your ocean. Keranos never sent the weapon into your waters. It was never claimed by the ruins of Eryxmethes. How could you deceive us all this time?" Thesa pushed Phoenix away from her and sped for the surface. Whether she wanted it or not, a war between her brothers was coming.